Hi everyone, and welcome to Level Up Guitar, where you come to level up your playing. I'm Kalen, and today we're talking more about modes. So last week we talked about the modes in terms of how they relate to the 5 positions. If you missed that video, there's a link to it for you. But today I want to talk about the question, what are modes in a musical sense? How would you explain what a mode is in terms of real music? Well, it's actually determined by what chord we're using as our home bass and how we are moving to and from other chords in the key. We sometimes refer to this as the harmonic context, which you can think of as the underlying chord progression. Now, if you know a thing or two about modes, you might be saying, wait, I thought modes are defined by the interval pattern between the notes. In other words, what is the order of whole and half steps? And you're right, but that definition is just telling you how to make a mode. It's not telling you why it sounds the way it does and how to use it and bring out its distinguishing characteristics. Let's start by looking at one of the more interesting modes, Phrygian. If you're comfortable with the key of G major, we're just starting on the 3rd note of that key, and we're going to kind of reorient ourselves to this note B as our new tonal center. You'll notice in the key of G, B is a minor chord, so I'm going to play that chord and then play the Phrygian scale over it, just using the B string to make it easy to follow the whole and half steps. This mode has a really distinctive sound to it because it has a flat second. You can see this if you look at the interval series, that there is a half step between the 1st and 2nd notes. On the most basic level, you get the sound of the mode just by playing the scale. But in order to really evoke the sound of the mode, we need a harmonic context that uses that half step in the chord progression. We'll use B minor, C major, D major, C major. You can really hear the sound of the Phrygian mode now, just by the chord progression, even if your melody doesn't use the entire scale. If you do want to accentuate the sound of the mode in your solo or melody, you want to make sure to use that flat second, meaning we're going to use that half step between our home bass B and the C natural a half step above it. By the way, if you're enjoying this video, feel free to check out the Patreon, where you can get high quality images as well as any additional content for the lessons here. You can find a link in the description and help support the channel. So we figured out that you can evoke the sound of a mode in 2 ways, by playing the scale over its associated chord, or you can create a chord progression that is specific to that mode. I think this second concept is more important. It's a little trickier than the first one, but it goes deeper into the question of how we use modes in actual music. And it turns out each mode has 1 or 2 particular chord progressions that really make it sound like itself. But wait a minute, why is it that we hear these modes as being different or exotic in some way? Let's backtrack just a second to see if we can explain this. To understand why, it's first important to make sure that we understand the basic major and minor scales. These are the more vanilla or regular sounding contexts that a large majority of music is based around. And because of that, our ears have grown accustomed to hearing those scales as a reference point for normal. So any deviations from these regular major or minor scales strikes us as distinctive. What this means is that in order to really understand why a mode sounds the way it does, we have to compare it to the regular major or regular minor mode that we're used to hearing as a reference point. Just saying, this mode sounds like Phrygian because it has this particular interval pattern is overly simplistic. Instead, you need a slightly more involved, but simple, 3-step process. 1. Determine, is this a major or a minor mode? 2. Put this down on paper next to your natural major or natural minor mode. And 3, identify the notes or intervals that are different. In case you don't know how to do step 1, you just look at the first 2 intervals of the scale. If it's 2 whole steps, it's a major mode. And if it's a whole and a half step, it's a minor mode. For step 2, just make sure you remember how to spell a natural major and natural minor scale, because you're going to have to construct one of these scales from the same starting point as the mode in question. For a minor scale, this is whole half whole, whole half whole whole. Step 3, look at what note or notes are different. This one is pretty self-explanatory. So now we've established that these modes are not just specific interval patterns derived from the major scale, but they are also specific deviations or changes to your regular major and minor scales. And you may have noticed that I did something different in step 3 just a minute ago. When I compared the Phrygian scale to the regular minor scale, I started both scales on the same root. And I did this in order to more easily see which notes are the same and which notes are different. And this is called parallel modes, meaning different modes starting on the same root. If you saw my last video, you know I think you should learn relative modes first to establish an understanding of a single key center and how it maps out over the entire fretboard. But once you've done that, you've laid the foundation and you're ready to really dig into parallel modes. and that's really what we've been talking about this whole time. We've been looking at what makes a mode sound distinctive from another mode. Another mode that I really love the sound of is the Lydian mode. Let's do the same thing as before, and I'll play a C major chord, which is the 4 chord in the key of G, and we can just play again on the B string, but we'll play from C to C, up and back down. A really common chord progression for the Lydian mode is to play the major chord of the home bass, in this case a C, and pivot quickly to the major chord a whole step above. But why does this chord progression make it sound Lydian? Well, first of all, the only place that you have 2 major chords a whole step apart is when it is the 4 and the 5 chord of the key. So in the key of G, this is going to be our C and D major chords. In this case, our home bass is obviously C because we are starting and ending on the C, while the D chord is more momentary or transient. Even though we can hear the Lydian mode just by the nature of this chord progression, we should still do the 3-step process so that we can see about the distinctive features of the scale. First we say, step 1, is this a major or a minor mode? And we can see that it's major because it starts with 2 whole steps. Step 2, looking at this compared to the natural major scale, we can see the distinctive feature here is the 4. So a Lydian scale has a sharp 4 when compared to the natural major scale. Now just to make sure you aren't getting confused, remember that we are using parallel modes to compare the mode in question with either the regular major or regular minor scale. This means that the 2 scales you are comparing are going to come from different key centers, so they will not have the same notes. So in this case, we looked at C Lydian scale, and we went to compare that to a C major scale. So we have to remember to form the C major scale, starting on a C, using the whole and half step series that defines the natural major scale. So the takeaway here is that a mode sounds the way it does because of the chord progression or underlying harmonic context present within that piece of music. The scale itself does define the mode, but since we don't always play the whole scale, that's not a good indicator of what mode you're in from the perspective of the listener or the composer. All right, that's it for today. Check out the Patreon link in the description for any images and extras related to these lessons. If you have any questions or suggestions, leave a comment, and I hope you like and subscribe for more tips, tricks, and secrets from Level Up Guitar.